Hello students, in the previous class we have discussed about the different parts of the human respiratory system. So in the today's class we are going to study the today's topic are mechanism of breathing. So we are going to study how do we breathe, and then we are also going to study transport of respiratory gases. So what are respiratory gases? Basically we take oxygen and we give out carbon dioxide. So these are the two respiratory gases, and we are going to study the transport of these gases. Now let us first discuss what is breathing. Now breathing simply means breathing is a process in which we take the air rich in oxygen and we give out the air rich in carbon dioxide. So in the process of breathing, we take in oxygen, we take in air which is rich in oxygen. So basically the air which is rich in oxygen, and we give out air rich in carbon dioxide. So this process is called as breathing. Now the it can be divided into two processes, that is taking in of air and giving out of the air. So taking in of the air is called as inhalation. Okay, and giving out of the air is called as exhalation. So when we take in the air and is called as inhalation, and when we give out the air is called as inhalation. So one inhalation plus one exhalation is equal to one breath. So what is one breath? One breath is equal to one time inhalation. So one inhalation plus one time exhalation. Okay, so one inhalation is plus one exhalation is equal to one breath. So that you should write in your copies. Okay, so I hope this breathing is clear. So breathing means taking in the air rich in oxygen and giving out the air rich in carbon dioxide. Now we are going to study how do we breathe. Now before we study how do we breathe or what is the mechanism of breathing, let us first discuss the basic thing, that is the arrangement where the lungs are present. Okay, now if we see the our chest cavity, the lungs are present inside the chest cavity. If we see the chest cavity from a side, not from the front but from the side, so I have already made a chest cavity here. You can see a chest cavity here, and if we see from the side, we in the front we will see what is present. These are ribs. Okay, and then at the bottom what is present? This is diaphragm. Okay, and at the back what is present? This is the backbone, or we simply say backbone or vertebral column. Okay, so inside this cavity the lungs are present. So the lungs are present inside this cavity. So you can see this cavity is a airtight cavity. Okay, or air sealed cavity means the air cannot leak out into the cavity. It can only go into the lungs. So these are lungs. Okay, so lungs. So air can only reach the lungs. Now let us discuss the mechanism of inhalation, and then I will encourage you to write the process of exhalation on your own based on inhalation. It is just opposite. Now as we see, our backbone is fixed, it cannot move up and down, it is remaining at its own place. But our ribs, now ribs, uh, there are ribs, and in between the ribs the muscles are there. So these are called as rib muscles. So rib muscle and diaphragm is a muscular sheath. This is a muscular sheath. Okay, so it is present at the bottom, and it separates the chest cavity from the abdominal cavity, or from the cavity which is present below it, that is abdomen. Okay, so diaphragm, so muscles have the property to contract and relax. So rib muscles and the diaphragm both contracts. Okay, and as they contract, the ribs move outward. So I am making the new position of the ribs with the help of the dotted line, and the diaphragm becomes flat. It becomes flat. So ribs moves upwards and outward, and the diaphragm moves downwards and becomes flat. So as a result, you can see now the area of the chest cavity has increased. So area of the chest cavity increases. So this is increases. So when the area of the chest cavity increases, what happens? The pressure now, as it is a air sealed cavity, so the pressure in the lungs decreases. Now why? You have already learned that pressure is equal to force upon area. So pressure is inversely proportional to area. Okay. So when the area is increased, pressure decreases. So area of the chest cavity increases, pressure in the lungs decreases. So when the pressure in the lungs decreases, so the air pressure, now we are talking here about air pressure in the lungs decreases. So air moves from atmosphere. Why? Because atmosphere becomes a high pressure area and the lungs become a low pressure area. So air moves from atmosphere to the lungs, that is from high pressure area to the low pressure area. So the atmosphere then becomes high pressure area and the lungs become the low pressure area, and this process we call as inhalation. Okay. Now what about exhalation? Opposite things happen. Now the ribs muscle relaxes and the diaphragm also relaxes. So when the rib muscles and diaphragm relaxes, they come back to their original position. And when they come back to the original position, what happens? The chest area of the chest cavity decreases. So when the area of the chest cavity decreases, pressure in the lungs increases, and when the pressure in the lungs increases, the lungs become a high pressure area and the atmosphere becomes a low pressure area. So then the air moves out of the lungs into the atmosphere because the lungs are in high pressure, and that process is called as exhalation. So inhalation, if you have understood inhalation, you can easily write exhalation. I hope this topic is clear. Now let us see what is given in your NCRT. Okay. Now this is simply copied from NCRT. Now when we breathe in, we lift our ribs, means the lift moves upward and outwards, and flatten our diaphragm, and the chest cavity becomes larger as a result. This already I have explained in the uh, previous slide. Now because of this, air is sucked into the lungs. Now they have not told in the NCRT why the air is sucked. They have only told that the area of the chest cavity increases, but they did not tell us that pressure in the lungs decreases. And because of decrease in the pressure of the lungs, the air moves from the atmosphere into the lungs. Okay. So air is sucked into the lungs and fills the expanded alveoli. Now the air has entered the alveoli. Now what happens at the alveoli? Let us see. This is also very important. What happens with the alveoli? Now this is the alveoli and this is the blood capillary which is having two arrows. So the blood is coming from here and the blood is moving out from here. So this blood which is coming from the different body part, this blood is coming from the basically from the heart. Okay, this blood is coming from the heart for purification. Now purification means it contains carbon dioxide. This blood contains carbon dioxide. So when the air is coming here, the air from the atmosphere, it contains oxygen. So oxygen moves into the blood and carbon dioxide moves out of the blood, and that carbon dioxide goes out. Okay, goes out to the bronchioles and then to the bronchi and then to the trachea and then through the nasal passage and through the nostrils, it goes out of the body into the atmosphere. So this is how this is what is happening in the alveoli. So alveoli, in the alveoli, exchange of gases takes place. So the blood is brought to the alveoli is having carbon dioxide, but the blood which is going out of the alveoli contains oxygen. So blood becomes oxygenated in the alveoli. So what is written here? Let us see. The blood brings carbon dioxide from the rest of the body for release into the alveoli. So the blood is brought into the alveoli so that carbon dioxide can be released in the alveoli, and the oxygen from the alveolar air is taken up by the blood and in the alveolar blood vessels to be transported to all the cells of the body. So the bloods have become now oxygenated, and this blood will go to the heart, and the heart will pump this oxygenated blood to all the cells of the body so that the cells can do respiration and break down glucose and produce energy. I hope this topic is clear. Now let us move to the next part, and that is also a very important part. During the breathing cycle, when the air is taken in and let out, the lungs, remember that the lungs always contain residual volume of air. Now, what is this residual volume of air? Now, if I tell you to fill the air in your lungs, maximum air, as much as you can fill, okay, and then I tell you after filling the air, release the air maximum out of your lungs, maximum by doing forcibly you can release the lungs out of mean you can release the air out of the lungs forcibly, then also there will be some air remaining inside the lungs. After removing the air from the lungs forcibly, then also there is some amount of air remaining in the lungs, and this air is present always, and this volume of air is called as residual volume of air. Till we are alive, this air is always present in our lungs. If this air is not there, our lungs will collapse. And what is the function of this residual volume of air? So that diffusion of gases can take place without any problem, so that there is sufficient time for oxygen to be absorbed and carbon dioxide to be released, or we can simply say that diffusion of oxygen and carbon dioxide can take place without any problem. So what this question comes, what is the residual volume of air, or what is the function of residual volume of air? So you can simply write the residual volume of air is present in the lungs all the time, so that there is sufficient time for oxygen to be absorbed and for carbon dioxide to be released, or simply you can say there, so that there should be diffusion of carbon dioxide and oxygen without any problem. Now let us move to the next part, that is transport of the gases. Now we have absorbed oxygen. How is the oxygen going to be transported by our body? Now we already have studied that oxygen is transported by the hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is a respiratory pigment, okay, and it is transporting the oxygen to different parts of the body. Where is this hemoglobin present? This hemoglobin is present on the surface of red blood cells. Let us see what is given here in the NCERT. Now when the body size of the animals is large like us, the diffusion is not enough to transport oxygen or transport carbon dioxide to anywhere. Why? Because diffusion is a very slow process that we have already discussed in the beginning of the chapter. So how is the oxygen is transported? So we have got respiratory pigments. So what is the respiratory pigments? Hemoglobin is the respiratory pigment which have high affinity. Affinity means love for oxygen. So it attaches oxygen, hemoglobin attaches oxygen, and it can transport oxygen. So this pigment is present in RBC. Okay, so hemoglobin reacts with oxygen and forms oxyhemoglobin. Okay, so in this form the oxygen is transported by hemoglobin, the form of oxyhemoglobin. This is how oxygen is transported. Now what about carbon dioxide? Now some amount of carbon dioxide is also transported by hemoglobin, but that is not given in your NCERT. Now most of the carbon dioxide is transported in the dissolved form. So carbon dioxide get dissolved in the blood. Now which part of the blood it get dissolved? What is the fluid part of the blood? The fluid part of the blood is plasma, because it contains water. So the water present in the plasma dissolves carbon dioxide. So in the dissolved form, carbon dioxide is transported in our body. Most of the carbon dioxide is transported in the dissolved form. Okay, but the carbon dioxide is transported in other forms also that you are going to study in your higher classes. But as of now, carbon dioxide in our body is more soluble in water than oxygen, so it is transported in the dissolved form in our blood. So the carbon dioxide is transported in the dissolved form. So I hope these topics are clear to you. Okay, so write the notes and study them and study well. Keep yourself safe. Thank you, students.